Edenicity began as a utopian exercise, but utopia provokes distrust, rightly so, as we'll see in this episode. Do we really need new cities, shiny new technology, profitable business models, even genius design? While these things are exciting, they do come with some hidden upfront costs, and in many cases promises that simply don't arrive. So how can we avoid the hidden traps of utopia, yet still build a livable future before it's too late? Welcome to Edenicity, best practices for sustainably abundant cities. Let's start with that first question. Do we need new cities? When I launched Edenicity in 2020, I sure thought so. That was the model that I went with for the first 40 episodes. Then in 2021, I was approached to help think through the plan for a whole new city. Now, as the details of that project became clear to me, I had to turn it down. Problem was that, like so many new cities in the world, this one was carved out of wilderness. And in permaculture, that's a type 1 error, meaning avoid at all costs. The reason is simple. We live in a world where our sprawling land use, especially agriculture, has wiped out half the living biomass, so we can scarcely afford to bulldoze any more of it. These images here from the construction of the new capital of Indonesia give you a sense of just how much destruction goes on. And no matter how many new trees you plant, we're talking about removing trees that weigh tons and replacing them with saplings that weigh just a couple kilograms at most. This is 1,000 times less biomass going in than what it replaces. And although it may be a temporary setback, it is most definitely a setback for the living biomass of the planet when these projects go in. Even the Charter Cities Institute, which is all about building new cities and has recently allied itself with the Freedom Cities Initiative of the Trump administration, admits that it takes 2 to 3 generations to build a city from scratch. They're thinking about cities such as Hong Kong, Singapore, and Dubai. But as I began to do more and more background research for episodes in seasons 2, 3, and 4, it became clear that cities go through profound renewal in 2 to 3 generations anyway. After all, major cities such as Houston went from compact, walkable streetcar cities to sprawling and car-dependent in less than 2 generations. In more recent times, the classic example is Amsterdam, which went from sprawling and car-dependent in the 1970s to a bicycle paradise today. All of that car infrastructure is completely replaced every 25 years or so, and the entire skyline can change radically in 2 to 3 generations as buildings themselves get old and are replaced. But is there room in cities for the world's growing urban population? Well, yes, because between 50 to 80% of the space in cities is devoted to cars, when you count streets, parking, service infrastructure, as well as green strips and setbacks that people use to keep themselves safe in their homes from cars and their pollution and noise. And public transit takes 90% less space. So yes, there's plenty of room in cities for growing populations. So no, in most cases, we do not need new cities, and we should instead focus on upgrading existing cities to sustainable abundance for everyone. Now, in the original Edenicity podcast, I focused on emerging technology, and that's, of course, very utopian. We talked about Hyperloop, Loop, and more recently, maglev, all of which would be really great to have. But when you really think about it, a lot of these can function as vaporware, meaning a product that is marketed and sold perhaps years before it's supposed to actually come into service, and thereby displaces all possible competitors. There are certainly analysts who look at Hyperloop as a cynical ploy on the part of Musk to sink California's high-speed rail plans and literally pave the way to more demand for automotive transit, which is his primary business. Loop transit, where you get into these little pods that go underground and shuttle you from point to point in cities, is undergoing what I would call a disproof of concept test in Las Vegas right now by another one of Musk's companies, the Boring Company. And the problem there is that rather than having autonomous 8 or 16-person pods, they have Teslas driven by human pilots carrying 3 to 4 passengers very slowly through an underground network that has run into its own underground traffic jams. Not a good look for utopian transportation. So I've rebuilt all the spreadsheets for Edenicity from the ground up for high-speed rail, trams, metros, and bikeways, all existing technology that have proven themselves much safer, much less demanding of resources, and much more affordable that the world has many decades of experience with. Another emerging technology is aquaponics, which in most modern installations involves lots of plastic and pumps, which are not terribly durable. And my thinking now is to focus more on technologies that have been around for thousands of years, and that is layered gardens and chimnampas, which are gardens linked by canals. They were pioneered in Mexico under that name and have also appeared in various forms before and since in numerous island societies all over the world. And early on, though I didn't talk much about it, I liked the idea of living machines, which is a plant-based wastewater disposal scheme that again uses a lot of pumps and has not yet proven itself at scale. So instead of that, I would just use classical water treatment techniques and really watch the treated effluent from that and make sure that it goes to irrigating fiber and biofuel crops. So rather than using built wetlands for wastewater processing right there close to where people live, I'm actually okay with having larger wastewater treatment facilities in cities that have anaerobic digesters that produce methane that then power those treatment plants, as they have done for many decades all over the world. And this leaves you with solids that are used again throughout the world to make really good compost. One of the big advantages of central water treatment plants is that they can be used in real time for health monitoring, to watch for diseases such as COVID or flu, or to trace chemical exposures. So again, Edenicity doesn't require substantially new technologies in water treatment. So once again, my thinking has evolved to build with proven technology with a tiny asterisk, and that is that it is wise to maintain public investments in new technology and new research in all of these fields and roll them out in very controlled ways and incrementally as they begin to prove themselves. But there's no need to wait for Hyperloop, Loop, maglev, aquaponics, and living machines before we even begin the project of upgrading our cities for sustainability. What about the business structure of urban upgrades? In the original podcast, I was proudly corporate, and that was a mistake, as we'll see in a moment. But here was the original reasoning. The world's urban population is growing by some 200,000 people a day from now until well after 2050. And when you look at the value that this could create economically, it works out to just astronomical numbers, something like $20 billion worth of real estate value generated per day for the next 30 years. I'd also looked at the competitive position of green developments in a handful of cities in the United States and found that they did very well compared to comparable neighborhoods. In other words, green was gold. Green could actually fetch a premium. Moreover, there's many natural efficiencies in designing the way that I've described: a 90% savings in transportation and health care costs, a 77% savings in energy costs, and shared amenities that would give us a high-quality lifestyle at great personal savings. But sadly, as I began to learn more about property development, it became clear that this wasn't a strong enough business case. Typically, when you want to finance a development, you need some combination of equity and debt, usually at least 30% equity, meaning you come up with that money out of your pocket, very unlikely as a developer, or you bring in some combination of private equity and, if you can get it, public investment to make up that equity wedge. This reassures the bank that they can fund the project on debt, which is basically a mortgage. The problem is, with a pretty substantial chunk of private equity, there's a really huge pressure towards higher margins, and that moves properties in the direction of premium development, meaning pricey homes and apartments. And if you look throughout the world, the private sector has left gigantic affordability gaps in the housing market just about everywhere, and especially in the United States over the past 40 years or so. Now, that's just the return on equity consideration. The other thing to consider is risk. When we talk about doing rooftop gardens, courtyard orchards, and transit-oriented car-free development, now we're doing something that's really new and, from the bank's perspective, unproven. It's much easier to get a strip mall approved, even though they're dropping like flies as the online economy grows. If you're doing something even a little bit new, it's considered higher risk. I first ran into this 30 years ago when I got turned down for a mortgage because the apartment that I was hoping to buy did not have a parking place. And that just broke their formulas. So there's already an affordability market failure. And on top of that, Edenicity would come in a very unproven, maybe premium, maybe not sector. So making Edenicity corporate and profit-driven seems like a really tough sell. Now, it can be done. If you look at Singapore, for example, the government has developed lots of social housing for 80% of their population. Vienna has no shortage of limited profit and builder co-op construction because the government will guarantee low interest rate loans. So given these realities, where would Edenicity fit in? Well, I think in general, just as a channel, it exists to inform urban planning of the ecological realities that cities are embedded in and how they need to respond to that so they can have a prosperous future. I think it would be really great to see some public or maybe nonprofit revolving funds evolve to de-risk the Edenic parts of new development. These would be the rooftop gardens, the courtyard orchards, the sheltered bikeways, transit-oriented development, and all the rest. But since we're talking about planning and design, this really begs the question, does Edenicity need a great designer? Now, I think it's kind of painfully obvious that utopian visions are autocratic by nature. They begin with frustration with the real world, where people have the thought, well, if I were in charge, here's what it would look like. So this is really an autocratic way to look at the world, and I think people are right to resist it. But can we trust the masses to make good decisions about design? On the face of it, it would seem we don't, because try doing any new development in California, and you run into just a whole mass of NIMBYs. Now, I've gotten to know quite a few people who found themselves in the NIMBY position over specific developments. Some are actually fans of this channel. And what I've seen on the ground, as I've gotten to know people from many walks of life, is that the process of decision-making, of basic governance, is often structured in such a way that we can get into conflicts, but we often don't understand the trade-offs well enough to work collaboratively to come up with really good design solutions. Now, there are some cities that have done things differently. For example, Salt Lake City, Utah, ran a process called Envision Utah, where they ran a public charrette. This is a big design exercise with real-time data modeling, giving them feedback about budgets and land use as they looked at the projected growth of their city. And of course, everybody at first wanted their detached homes and didn't want to see apartments. But what they found was that if they grew in a sprawling, car-dependent way, that many of their costs would go way up, and that the hillsides would have to be developed, and they would start to lose their really beautiful scenic view. So iteratively, as they plugged in new assumptions, the community came to, if not a perfect consensus, at least a strong enough decision point to where they got behind public transit and a mosaic of higher density development, which kept the development out of the hills, provided for a lot of affordable workforce housing, and public transportation options. And this wasn't just a fluke. The process of public engagement and public involvement in design and decision-making worked here in Honolulu as well. A few years back, bike sharing just exploded on the scene. We went from no bike sharing to suddenly all kinds of protected bike lanes and bike share racks all over town. And what made this a success was that the agency that developed it took the time to meet with residents all along the corridors that were going to be affected and discuss the pros and cons of putting in the infrastructure, and even solicit suggestions from them about a pricing scheme that would work really well. And having seen the pricing scheme in Honolulu versus other cities such as Columbus, I can say that they did a really good job when they launched, getting the pricing that worked for people. They had really rapid adoption. The Beaky Bike system was instantly popular. So rather than having autocratic utopian design, I'll be on the lookout in this channel for ways to be ever more participatory, both in decision-making and in design. All right, my final question is, should we fast-track Edenicity? Now, when I first started this project, it seemed like we really should. And if anything, I have even more urgency about that today. But the tech bro oligarchs are really fond of saying, go fast and break things. And of course, as an American living through some of the consequences of that, this gives me real pause. There are, of course, the Doge firings at the FAA, the Weather Service, the Food and Drug Administration, the Centers for Disease Control, all of which are having devastating effects in our society. There's also the USAID cuts, which have already cost an estimated 400,000 lives and are likely to cost another 770,000 lives per year. These are devastating human tragedies. The cruelty is just sickening. Things are being broken, but it's not clear what's being built in their place. If anything, this seems to be a strategy to privatize everything in the long run. And as we saw with housing, the free market can have permanent gaps that it fails to fill. In the case of USAID, Elon Musk's cuts are already causing catastrophic surges in preventable deaths. There is no way that global markets will magically step in and replace life-saving systems that have been built over decades, let alone fund them with tens of billions of dollars a year. Now, why is there this zeal to break things just for the sake of breaking them? Well, because it sows chaos. And as we learned in the COVID era, chaos is giga-profitable for the oligarchs. But this isn't entirely a new thing. Even before I was born, and certainly through much of my life, redlined neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods throughout the U.S. were bulldozed for highways and urban renewal. These are so disruptive of communities. I've lived in communities that were affected by this. I'm very hesitant to just throw everything out and start over. Instead, we should keep the best of what we have. We have systems in our society that work extremely well. For example, the FAA, which has made air travel 1,000 times safer than car travel over the course of decades of painstaking incremental attention to every process in aviation, from airplane design to pilot training to maintenance to flight operations. This is a very large and complex system that has just been blindsided by the current administration's policies and gouged apart with very little plan for what comes next. So going forward, Edenicity would upgrade the worn-out parts of cities with designs that have proven to work many times better for people and the planet. Rather than do this autocratically, we would use well-tested, well-informed, collaborative processes such as those used by Envision Utah. All right, here's a quick screenshot of what we've been talking about so far. In 2020, Edenicity was pretty utopian. We were thinking about building new cities, really enthralled with emerging technology, very much a private equity corporate model. And yes, it was very much an end-to-end design concept. In other words, it was autocratic, which between that and private equity has a go fast and break things ethos built in. Today, Edenicity advocates for best practices. And this means upgrading existing cities, because building new cities doesn't save us any time, and we have way more social energy in existing cities. Using proven technology, public investment with perhaps a nonprofit revolving fund and multi-stakeholder co-ops, and participatory design that keeps the good while we build better together. So if you want to learn more about Edenicity, there's a few publications which are available in the links below. And as always, thanks so much to the amazing patrons for your support. Take care, stay green, see you next time.